The first sign of Naarifin's arrival was the silence. It wasn't the peace of the morning, nor the calm before a storm. It was the absence of sound, the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. And then came the thunder. Not the rumble of distant battle, but the relentless march of an army that would spare no one. In the shadows of Cyrodiil's great cities, Lord Naarifin rose from obscurity, a figure cloaked in the kind of malice that could only be bred by the heart of the Thalmor. There was something cold about him, something chilling that made men tremble at the mere mention of his name. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, saw beyond the battlefield, beyond the bloodshed. To Naarifin, the war wasn't about conquest, it was about a vision. The vision of an Aldmeri empire where all others were subjugated, their lives nothing more than pawns to be moved and discarded at will. Naarifin was a predator. He didn't need to scream orders to be heard. His presence alone was enough to command the unyielding loyalty of his forces. He didn't fight for glory or honor. He fought to break those who opposed him. His mind was a labyrinth of dark strategy, each move carefully planned to instill fear, to unhinge the minds of those who dared resist. There was no honor in his campaigns, only the cold, relentless march of annihilation. He took joy not in victory, but in watching the will of his enemies wither away beneath his iron fist. He was a shadow that crept across the land, unseen, unfeeling, until his forces suddenly descended upon the unprepared cities of Cyrodiil. The walls of Leowyn fell before they even had time to scream, and Bravil, once a beacon of defiance, was ground into dust beneath the weight of his war machine. It was said that Naarifin smiled when he saw the devastation, not because of his victory, but because of the terror it wrought. Every corner he turned, every city he razed, he felt the power of control surge through him like an intoxicating drug. He wasn't just invading cities, he was breaking the spirit of an entire people. To him, they were nothing more than tools. The citizens of Cyrodiil, the soldiers who fought against him, they were vermin. His vision of the Aldmeri dominion was one where nothing and no one stood in the way of the Thalmor's ultimate power. His soldiers followed his lead without question, for they too were swept up in his dark charisma, his promise of a new order where the Altmer would reign supreme and the world would be reshaped in their image. And through it all, Naarifin never faltered. His will was unshakable, as if he knew that nothing, not the cries of the innocent, not the defiant shout of a warrior, could stop him. He was beyond fear, beyond mercy. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a force of nature. Lord Naarifin's role in the Great War was nothing short of catastrophic. A master strategist and brutal leader, he spearheaded the invasion that sent shockwaves through Cyrodiil. His first strike was swift. Leowyn fell within days, followed quickly by Bravil. The cities were devastated, and their people were left with nothing but the memories of their once great homes. Naarifin didn't waste time. By 4th Era 172, his forces had surrounded the imperial city, cutting off every escape route save one, the path to Bruma, the last shred of hope for the Empire. It was a classic maneuver, a textbook example of how to break an enemy's spirit. The city's defenses, already stretched thin, were forced into a desperate holding pattern, praying for reinforcements that would never come. The desperation in the air was palpable, the people of Cyrodiil knowing that their fate was now in the hands of the Thalmor. As Naarifin's forces marched forward, every inch of the imperial city was a battleground. Inside the walls, chaos reigned. The proud capital of the empire fell like a toy under the foot of a giant. Its ancient walls cracked and crumbled as Naarifin's forces poured in like a flood. Naarifin's ultimate goal was more than just conquest. He sought to annihilate the empire and remake Tamriel in the image of the Thalmor. The ritual he initiated, known as the culling, was the terrifying climax of his ambitions. This wasn't just some military strategy, it was a prophecy, a dark pact with forces from beyond, and a plan to unleash the full fury of oblivion upon the unsuspecting masses of Cyrodiil. This wasn't a simple battle or a siege. It was an apocalyptic vision, one that would scorch the land and leave nothing behind but ash. The culling was a twisted ritual that sought to summon the fires of oblivion, to bring the very chaos of the Daedric princes into the mortal realm. It was Naarifin's belief that by unleashing these hellish forces, the Aldmeri dominion would rise as the uncontested ruler of Tamriel. And what of the Empire? The bones of Cyrodiil, left smouldering in the wake of this infernal plan, would serve as a grim foundation for a new world order. Rumors had spread before the ritual even began. Some claimed Naarifin had made contact with the Daedric lords themselves, particularly Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction. Was this just a power-hungry general, or had Naarifin truly lost himself to madness, willing to sacrifice not just his enemies, but the very souls of his people to achieve his vision of purity? The very thought of the Thalmor unleashing such forces in their pursuit of godhood was enough to make anyone with a shred of sanity recoil in disgust. But Naarifin wasn't a fool. He knew the power of oblivion was a double-edged sword. What he planned wasn't a simple act of destruction. It was an attempt to reshape reality itself, to break the chains of the mortal realm and bring the Daedric lords into a new order, one where they ruled unchallenged. This was the final step in the Dominion's great design, complete annihilation of all who defied them. Those who still worshipped Talos, those who resisted their unrelenting will, they were mere insects to be crushed underfoot. And the culling was the weapon that would do it. The whispers of Daedric influence had long surrounded the Thalmor, and Naarifin's ritual only confirmed what many had feared. The Dominion was playing with forces beyond their comprehension. They weren't just a threat to the Empire, they were a threat to the very fabric of existence itself. The Battle of the Red Ring was the turning point, the moment when the Empire's last hope crushed the Thalmor's ambitions. Naarifin had come too close to victory. By the time the battle began, his forces had encircled the Imperial city. The city had fallen to chaos. Looting, murder, and destruction were the order of the day. Naarifin, a fanatic with a mind consumed by his thirst for power, was mere steps away from completing his catastrophic ritual, which would have brought about an end to the Empire and plunged Tamriel into eternal darkness. But this time, the Thalmor's relentless march was halted, not by diplomacy, not by appeasement, but by the sheer force of arms. Emperor Titus Mede II, who had been all but absent from the battlefield until then, led his troops in a desperate strike, a counter-offensive that came at the last possible moment. Together with the forgotten hero, who, legend tells us, was the embodiment of resolve, they began to close in on the Dominion forces. The tide of battle shifted. The Thalmor, who prided themselves on their discipline and superiority, suddenly found themselves besieged on all sides. Naarifin, confident and nearly triumphant, now had nowhere to turn. His grand prophecy was left unfinished. His victory was snatched from him at the very precipice of success. It was the moment that the Empire stood as one, facing the nightmare of destruction the Thalmor sought to bring. But the forgotten hero's sword was true, and Titus Mede's legions, no matter how battered, were resolute. As Naarifin's forces crumbled, so did his plans. The ritual that would have torn the very fabric of Tamriel apart was stopped before it could reach its horrifying conclusion. A moment of victory, but one that would not come without its costs. Many died that day, lives lost in the bloodied streets, in the crumbling walls of the Imperial city, under the shadow of the White Gold Tower. Had it not been for that final stand, had Naarifin succeeded, the history of Tamriel would have been rewritten in ash and blood. Instead, the Thalmor were forced to retreat, their dreams of dominance shattered. They had underestimated the resolve of the Empire, the stubborn will of those who would not bend. Naarifin's ambition died with him, but his defeat didn't end the threat of the Thalmor. Not by a long shot. The following is an excerpt from a veteran legionnaire from the battle to quote, "The sun had long set over the imperial city, but its light was still reflected in the blood-stained streets. The city, once the jewel of Tamriel, now stood as a hollow shell of what it had been, consumed by the crushing weight of the Dominion's siege. Even the most defiant had surrendered, broken by the relentless onslaught, and yet despite all that had been lost, the flames of hope still flickered, hidden beneath the rubble. I remember that night as if it was yesterday. The Battle of the Red Ring was at its peak, and the Dominion's forces had all but claimed victory. We had been trapped for months, the city surrounded, our backs against the wall. Our supplies were running low, our soldiers dying by the day, and our last hope rested on one man, Emperor Titus Mede II. I was a lowly soldier, just a face among the throngs of imperial legionnaires fighting tooth and nail to hold the line. We had been battered and broken, and yet somehow we fought on. The Dominion's banners flew high in every corner of the city, mocking us as they looted and burned. We had no choice but to hold our ground. To lose the imperial city meant the end of the empire. And then, as the night grew darker, I saw him, Titus Mede II in the flesh. Amidst the chaos, the emperor emerged from the shadows of the white gold tower. His face was worn, his armor battered, but his eyes, those eyes, were as sharp and determined as ever. There was no hesitation in his steps, no fear in his presence. He had been in this war from the start, fighting for everything he believed in, and this night, in that moment, he was a symbol of defiance. The Dominion had all but won, yet here was the Emperor, leading us not from some distant throne, but from the front lines. He knew the city was on the brink of collapse, that our forces were scattered and demoralized, and yet he did not waver. Titus stood tall, with the same unyielding resolve he'd carried throughout the war. He rallied the remaining imperial soldiers, his voice ringing clear through the madness of battle. "Stand with me," he cried, "for the Empire, for the future of Tamriel." It was a call to arms, not just for us soldiers, but for every citizen who had witnessed the horrors of the past few months. His words ignited something inside us, a fire we had thought extinguished. The Emperor, this symbol of strength, was not surrendering. He would not bow to the Thalmor. With renewed vigor, we turned the tide. The Dominion's forces had been stretched too thin, overconfident in their victory. They had underestimated us. They thought we were finished, but under the Emperor's banner, we fought as if the gods themselves were at our backs. The battle raged on, but it was no longer a matter of survival. It became a matter of victory. I will never forget the moment when we breached their lines. The look on Naarifin's face, the shock, the disbelief as his forces began to retreat. The general who had thought he'd already won, his empire of ash crumbling before him. It was Titus Mede II who had turned the tide, who had made the impossible happen. He led us from the front, not as a distant monarch, but as a leader, a true emperor. That night, we did not just fight for survival. We fought for vengeance, for the honor of the empire, for the people who had been crushed beneath the heel of the Thalmor. And as the sun rose the next morning, casting its first light over the scarred city, we knew one thing for certain: the Thalmor had been defeated. But that victory was not just ours. It was Titus Mede's. The Emperor had saved the Empire, and for that, we would remember him forever. The Thalmor may think themselves invincible, but they will never know the strength of a people who fight for their home. We will rise again, as long as we have leaders like Emperor Titus II." End quote. Naarifin's end came swiftly after his defeat at the Battle of the Red Ring, but it was anything but clean. This wasn't just a military loss, it was a humiliation. The Thalmor, in all their arrogance, had tasted victory, and then, just as they believed the final stroke was within their grasp, the ground was ripped from beneath them. captured and bound, Naarifin was dragged through the streets of the imperial city in chains, a cruel spectacle for all to witness. It was a rare moment of reckoning for the Thalmor, a reminder that they were not gods, that the will of the Empire still carried weight, despite their dreams of supremacy. He was hung from the white gold tower, his body left on display for 33 days. It was a message to the Thalmor, to the Dominion, to anyone who dared challenge the Empire. No one, not even the mightiest of their ranks, would escape the wrath of the Empire's justice. But the story didn't end there. On the 34th day, something strange occurred. A flying Daedra, as the rumors claimed, came to retrieve Naarifin's body. Whether it was a grotesque ritual, some unholy pact with the Daedric princes, or just another piece of Thalmor myth, no one can say for sure. But one thing is certain, the event sent shockwaves through Cyrodiil. The Daedra's involvement in his fate only fueled the whispers. Was Naarifin truly dead? Or had he simply been whisked away by dark forces to return one day? Had he truly been defeated? Or was this a mere delay in the Thalmor's inevitable rise? Even in death, Naarifin left a mark on Tamriel that couldn't be erased. His actions were not the erratic schemes of a madman, but a calculated step in the Thalmor's larger, devastating goal to reshape the world according to their twisted vision. And though he perished, the spirit of the Thalmor, their ambition, their contempt for the rest of Tamriel, remained as dangerous as ever. The shadow of Naarifin still looms over the Empire, for the Thalmor do not forgive, nor do they forget. You may think Naarifin is gone. You may think his twisted reign ended with his hanging, but know this, the Thalmor are eternal. Their corruption festers beneath every stone of the Empire, waiting for the moment to strike again. Naarifin was but a taste, a glimpse of the nightmare they wish to bring. They are not gods, but they will make you bow before them all the same. Mark my words, as long as the Thalmor breathe, the fires of destruction will never truly die. The flames will rise again, and all of Tamriel will burn.